Hello, crafty friends. This is Anya General with Ink, Paper, Scissors. Welcome back. Today is part 2 of my Lisa Horton Interference Ink Guide, where I'm sharing 11 more techniques using the Cloud9 Interference inks. These inks are unique because they show up on both white and black cardstock, and I'll be demonstrating both, unless a technique didn't show up well on black, in which case I've skipped it to focus on what works best. I didn't have time to turn these panels into cards yet, but I'll be using them in an upcoming live stream, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'd love for you to join me. Before we jump in, like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a tutorial. Now let's jump right into the remaining techniques. Number 12. Spray stencil lifting. I used the direct-to-paper technique to apply crushed velvet shimmer all over my A2 panel. I placed the sunburst stencil over my background and then sprayed it with the sheer shimmer spray in the color silver. I pulled the stencil off and placed a paper towel over my background, and there is a texture of silver sparkle on my background. I repeat this technique with water. I'm using another direct-to-paper background in the same color crushed velvet shimmer. I place the stencil over it and spray it generously with water. I place a paper towel over the stencil and background to absorb the remaining dampness. Then I removed the stencil, and water lifted the ink where the stencil was placed, creating a textured background design. My next technique is called Night Glow Technique. I'm using my Misty and a white and black A2 panel of cardstock. I'm using anti-static powder on my white A2 panel so I can heat emboss on it. I'm aligning my fairy stamp called Josie in the middle of my A2 panel. Once I have it aligned, I stamp it with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I sprinkle clear embossing powder by Ranger over my image while my image is wet. Then I heat set it and let the embossing powder melt. This makes my image ink resistant, which is what I want it to be. I repeat the process on black cardstock. I'm again using anti-static powder on my black A2 panel. Instead of using black ink, I'm using Versamark ink. Next, I use the white embossing powder by Gina K Designs to heat emboss my image. First, on white cardstock, I'm starting to blend lemon candy shimmer around the dandelion of the fairy, making it look like the fairy is blowing on it and that it's creating a yellow cloud. Then I'm starting to ink blend Lavender Fields shimmer around the fairy for a soft purple glow. Next, I'm layering Galaxy Dream on the outside perimeter of the fairy and then charcoal gold shimmer on the edges of the cardstock for a dark night sky. I don't spend a ton of time in making the ink look smooth, as I want to demonstrate this technique and I can always touch it up later. The colors work beautifully to build a night sky with a glow from the mica contained in the inks. Next, I'm demonstrating the same technique on black cardstock using the same type of scene. I'm starting with the color Golden Sun Shimmer around the dandelion to give it a soft, light glow. Then I'm ink blending Mermaid Lagoon Shimmer around the fairy to give the fairy a soft purple glow. Next, I'm using Tropical Paradise to ink blend around the perimeter of the fairy and then warm Chestnut Shimmer around the edges of the cardstock to show a dark night sky. The shimmer of the fully ink blended panel is beautiful. I take a cloth to wipe the ink off the fairy to make sure that she is pure white again. Since we heat embossed the fairy, the ink comes off super easy. Our next technique is called wet stamping. This technique involves stamping in layers using water interference inks. I am taking a stamp set by Altenew called A Splash of Color and my Misty. I'm using an A2 panel of Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock. Then I ink up my stamp with Mermaid Lagoon and I mist it twice with water and stamp it onto my cardstock. Then I start drying the panel with my heat tool. I want the ink to be fully dry to be able to layer the ink. After my A2 panel is dry, I place it back in my Misty and align the stamps where I want them to be, some overlapping. This time, I'm using crushed velvet shimmer to ink up my stamp. I spray it with water again and stamp it onto my A2 panel. Then I dry the stamped images again. This technique gives a soft watercolor effect with the ability to layer the colors if we dry them in between. You can see the inks layer well. They are a little translucent but not fully, so that the color layers really well. I did not repeat this process on black cardstock because in the first part of this guide, I demonstrated that the inks stamp on black cardstock, but they are not super easy to see. Water React Stamping. I used the direct-to-paper technique with Mermaid Lagoon Shimmer on white cardstock. I placed the A2 panel into my Misty and aligned the burlap bolt prints background stamp over it. Then I ink up the stamp with Tropical Paradise and I spritz it with water 2 to 3 times. Then I stamp it onto my panel. The water caused the stamped image to react and slightly blend with the background, and the stamped image has a distressed look. I repeat this process on black cardstock. Using the direct-to-paper technique, I add Festive fur to my black A2 panel. Then I place my black panel into the Misty. I ink up my stamp with Cherry Bomb Shimmer and I spritz it with water 2 to 3 times. I stamp it onto my black panel. Here again, the water caused the stamped image to react and slightly blend with the background. Additionally, in some areas, you can see the black cardstock beneath the stamped image. Glass mat smooshing. I am pressing the Lavender Fields, Peacock Tails, and Golden Sun colors onto my glass mat. I spritz it generously with water and then I start dipping my cardstock into it. I recommend using watercolor paper for this technique, but a regular 80-pound cardstock will hold up as well, even though it may warp more. I get 2 panels out of the colors that I'm smooshing onto my glass mat. I dry them with my heat tool to show the soft watercolor that results in a hint of shimmer over the full background, with some areas of intense shimmer. The camera does not pick it up well, but you get a pearlescent shimmer with this technique. I repeat this process on black cardstock with Mermaid, Lagoon, Tropical Paradise, and Lemon Candy. I dip my black cardstock into the wet ink and I dry it with my heat tool. On black cardstock, this technique works best if you repeat this process 2 to 3 times for a layered mica effect. Because the mica glows on dark cardstock, this technique gives a unique look with lots of shimmer when patiently repeated several times. It is a great technique to get some shimmer onto your dark backgrounds. Watercoloring. For this technique, I used charcoal gold, opal blush, Mermaid Lagoon, Tropical Paradise, and Lavender fields to create a soft watercolor effect. I started with pressing each ink onto my glass mat, creating small puddles of color. Then I prepped my watercolor cardstock by dipping my paintbrush in water and then moving it over my cardstock to wet the paper. This creates a damp surface, which helps the ink move more fluidly. Then, using a damp paintbrush, I pick up the Opal Blush Shimmer first and apply it to my black cardstock, letting the ink naturally flow and blend. I repeat this process with Charcoal Gold and Tropical Paradise on black cardstock, allowing the colors to mix slightly for a soft organic look. Next, I repeat this process on white watercolor cardstock with Mermaid Lagoon, Lavender Fields, and Tropical Paradise. Since interference inks have pigment and mica properties, they create a beautifully colorful and shimmery watercolor effect, different from traditional watercolor or dye inks. The shimmer is most pronounced on the darker cardstock with this technique. Stencil ink layering. This technique builds layers of color using stencils, showing how interference inks stack beautifully without reacting with previous layers. I took the white background from the glass mat smooshing technique and placed it on an Altenew sticky mat. Then I placed the Starburst stencil over it. Using a blending brush, I applied Mermaid Lagoon over the stencil. The beauty of interference inks is that the Mermaid Lagoon sits on top. The beauty of interference inks is that the Mermaid Lagoon sits on top of the previous background instead of blending into it, allowing the new design to remain crisp and visible. I repeat the same process on black cardstock. I take a direct-to-paper technique background with Tropical Paradise on it, and then I'm placing the Waves stencil by Hero Arts over it. Using a blending brush, I applied charcoal gold over the stencil. Again, you can see the gold is sitting on top of the Tropical Paradise rather than mixing into the previous layer of color. This technique provides a beautiful shimmer on your dark cardstock. 19. Glitter paper color technique. For the next technique, I'm using a white piece of glitter cardstock. I am starting to blend Tropical Paradise onto the white glitter cardstock. Then I'm adding Mermaid Lagoon next to it, showing that you can create different colors of glitter cardstock by adding your interference inks to your glitter paper. The glitter still sparkles beautifully through the ink blended colors. Embossing folder ink blending. My next 2 techniques are with embossing folders. I'm using the Waves and Bubbles embossing folder by Lisa Horton. With my small ink blending brush, I'm starting to dab Tropical Paradise into the embossing folder. I'm using the opposite side of the raised area to ink blend on. So to be clear, the bubbles that are set back from the embossing folder is where I'm adding my ink. I proceed to add Mermaid Lagoon and Lemon Candy. Once I'm done adding my ink, I take my water bottle and spritz it 2 to 3 times with water onto the inked areas. Then I add my white cardstock and run it through my die cutting machine. I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 with the following sandwich: Platform A, Shim F, my embossing folder with adapter plate D on top. I repeat this process on black cardstock using Golden Sun, Mermaid Lagoon, and Lemon Candy. I dab the colors with my small ink blending brush onto the embossing folder, and I spritz it with water and run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6. The results show a dry embossed pearlescent background. I love the results from this technique. Embossing folder stamping. Our next technique builds onto the last technique we just covered. In this technique, I am adding charcoal gold with a brayer onto the flat side of my embossing folder. If ink gets into the areas where I had my colored bubbles, I wipe it away with a cloth. Then I lock my paper in place by running the cardstock over the design and aligning it with the image on the opposite side of the embossing folder. I then spritz water on the side where I added the ink with a brayer, and I close the embossing folder. I run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 using the same sandwich as before. I repeat the process so my background is more saturated with color and the results are shimmery and organic. I repeat this process on black cardstock. I'm using a brayer to add warm chestnut ink to the flat side of my embossing folder. I lock my previous ink blended panel into place on the opposite side and I spritz the brayered side with water. I close the embossing folder and I run it through my die cutting machine. For best results, I repeat this process. The results are so unique on black cardstock, perfect for sympathy cards or just sky or galaxy backgrounds. If you own these inks, you have to try it. We are already on our last technique, gel press backgrounds. For this technique, I used Tropical Paradise, Lavender Fields, Mermaid Lagoon, Summer Garden, and Charcoal Gold with a 5x7 gel press to create colorful backgrounds. I started by pressing Tropical Paradise and Lavender Fields directly onto my gel press. Then I spritzed 2 pumps of water onto the inky gel press, and then I placed my white cardstock onto the gel press, gently pressing down to pick up the ink. I repeated this process again with Mermaid Lagoon and Summer Garden. Then I took my ink blending brush and dabbed it in the middle to blend the 2 inks together to give it a more organic look. I spritzed some water on top of my gel press and placed my white cardstock onto the inky gel press. The results are backgrounds full of color that shimmer when tilted in the light. I repeated this process on black cardstock using Charcoal Gold and Summer Garden. I pressed Charcoal Gold on one side of the gel press and then Summer Garden on the other side. Then I dabbed it with an ink blending brush to make the colors mix more organically. I spritzed some water on it and placed my black cardstock into it. I repeated the process again to intensify the results. and the results are stunning. Perfect for adding shine to your backgrounds. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into 22 Cloud 9 interference ink techniques. This was a labor of love for me as these inks are so unique and fun to use. You can find a complete list of all products used linked in the video description below with a handy visual supply list to make it super easy to shop. If you choose to use my links when making a purchase, I really appreciate it as it truly helps support my channel so I can keep creating detailed content like this. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and joining me for the second part of this complete guide to Lisa Horton Cloud 9 Interference inks. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a crafty friend, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a video. Let me know if you have used interference inks before and which technique you are most excited to try. I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have. Until next time, happy crafting!